Hello everyone, welcome back. So we're into a new week and we're starting a, a 5-week offering and examination of the George V period of British Commonwealth philately. I'm going to do a series of videos for each of these weeks, but I'm going to start with an overview of the period itself. So George V ruled from the death of Edward VII in 1910 in May until his death in February of 1936. So the period can be thought of and can be divided notionally into three parts: the early period, the middle period, and the late period. So the early period is from 1910 until about 1920, or just after the First World War. And during this period, the majority of the stamps are the Imperium key plate design or some other key plate design used by De La Rue, or engraved sets like the Rhodesian double heads that were done by Waterloo. The watermark that was in use during this period is the multiple crown CA watermark, which first appeared in the middle of Edward VII's reign. So its use continues into the early part of the reign. Now, in addition to this, the non-crown colonies or dominions in the Commonwealth had their own designs. So Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and other countries had their own designs. And still, India was another one that had its own designs. And then there were areas of the Commonwealth that used Great Britain stamps with various overprints during this period. So that's the early period. The middle period runs from about 1920 or between 1920 and 22 up until about 1933. And it basically took the designs of the previous period, and instead of using the multiple crown CA watermark, it uses the multiple script CA watermark that you see going all the way into Elizabeth's reign. In this period, most of the designs remain unchanged. Some of the territories issue new designs, and there are commemorative sets that appear in various colonies, but the basic definitive issues are the same. Okay, then there's the late period starting in about 1933-34 and extending to his death, and those are typically comprised of the engraved pictorial sets that collectors are so fond of. There's not a huge amount of time that these sets were in use. The Silver Jubilee issue, so the omnibus set appears in this time. And many of these sets, definitive issues, actually straddle Edward VIII's reign and actually last throughout the life of that very short reign from February until December of 1936. And some of them even extend slightly into the George VI period up until the first George VI designs are introduced. So each of these periods can comprise or form the basis for a lifetime specialization. The last period is probably the easiest in terms of cost, but both of the early and middle periods can get very expensive once you get into the high value stamps with postage and revenue inscriptions. A lot of them are revenues in all practical reality, but because they're inscribed postage and revenue, the possibility still exists that they could have been used for postage, and so collectors still tend to include them in a postage stamp collection. So the way I'm structuring the auctions over the next several weeks is I'm going to cover, rather than just go strictly by country, I'm going to split it into the different types of issues that were in use during those periods and cover each of those individually. So those classifications will be part one will be Australia and New Zealand. Part two will be the Imperium key plates that were produced by De La Rue. Part three will be the other key plate issues that De La Rue issued, so non-Imperium designs that were specific to particular colonies. Um, then part four will be the Indian key plate and overprints in Indian states, as well as the other issues of the Commonwealth that are not from either the first three types or the last part, which will be the engraved sets. Um, and that will be part five. So that's how I'm going to tackle George V over the next 5 weeks. A couple of pointers. I've already gone over the watermarks. The other thing that you'll have that forms a lot of interest during this period is the colored papers and just paper types in general. So De La Rue, in producing the key plate stamps, generally speaking, the lowest denominations up to about the 2.5 penny or the rupee equivalent uh, will be on plain paper with no coating. Um, Values 3 pence and above, or the rupee equivalent, will typically be on chalk surface paper, making the watermark a lot harder to see. So you need some patience and skill in identifying crown versus script CA on those higher values or mid values. On the low values, it's pretty easy to see even without watermark fluid. One thing that's of interest is that, inverted watermarks, missing letters from the watermark, those are all very rare varieties, and they exist usually on the low values, so that's a point of interest in the watermarks. With regard to the surface papers, certain values were produced on blue paper, red paper, and yellow paper. And for the early printings of those papers, the coloring was on the surface only. Later, it was all through the paper. And after the war, you get different substitutions of those papers where the color on the front is different from the color on the back. And when you look in Gibbons, they typically do a fairly exhaustive listing of those types for the first period with the multiple crown CA watermark. But then they get very, very, very superficial in their listings of the script CA period, even though in practice the script CAs can be found with a lot of the same variations that the multiple crown CA period is. So one of the things I'm going to try to do in covering this is to delve into that a little bit more and show you what can be done with the script CA issues, as they're every bit as interesting as the earlier ones. And there's an opportunity to get a good specialization together without spending a lot of money. Anyways, thanks for watching.